politically in the world today as it had probably 10, 20, 30 years ago. So they need to question which is another power that they will bring in with USA to balance out what Russia and China together as a bloc can bring and force USA into a corner or onto a deal which they might not want. And then we have three nations just talking every day on the table, but never actually inking a deal that would limit and balance out these nuclear arsenal powers and their ambitions.
And can negotiations really take place at this point in time? Of course, some people calling the Russia-Ukraine war a proxy war. Do you think we're at the right geopolitical flashpoint for those negotiations to happen, and of course bringing China in as well?
So it's not untrue when they call the Russia-Ukraine war a proxy war, because that is exactly what it is. Ukraine is taking a heavy beating. It's taking a heavy loss. Its people are facing very dire circumstances only because Europe and USA, under the banner of NATO, want to compete with Russia. And they've been trying to plant missiles all over the map, trying to encircle Russia. And there have been boundaries that have been pushed despite repeated agreements with Putin. So when you push the red buttons and you poke the bear is going to growl back sometimes. And unfortunately for them, that is a Russian bear. And now Ukraine is paying a heavy price for it. Although they may not admit to it, but the amount of money flowing to it, it's been armed to its teeth and it's still losing, should show the world that Russia is not that easily bullied as they would like the world to believe. So there is that dynamic, but I do believe that there is going to be peace in the year of 2026. I hope that the Russia-Ukraine war comes to an end and they find a deal which is mutually beneficial to the victors as well as the suffering nations, and they find a way to coexist. And when that does happen, then there is going to be unfortunately for Ukraine, there's going to be some concessions it's going to have to make, whether they like it or not, because they're not actually winning the war, no matter how they project it. Beyond that, so once that particular war is put to bed, then there is going to be a bigger conversation of how Russia and USA cooperate. Putin's a smart player. He knows how to play Trump. You've seen that happen in Alaska. You've seen that happen over the past year, while all the negotiations around the peace deals have been happening. So the smart player, he's there, and when you bring in China into the context, China, he's put out a tweet yesterday saying he's had a wonderful conversation with China, and he's also projected China as the #2 nation. The G2, he's called it before, Trump has called it before. So Trump holds China at a certain level, and he feels very, very safe with Russia and Putin and their ambitions or whatever their political strategies are. So I do believe he might want to actually bring this particular trifecta into action, but I do not know whether he'll be able to make it beneficial for USA in the long term.
Shruti, China has a far smaller arsenal than the likes of Russia and the United States. Do you think China would agree to limits here, and what would be the incentives?
That's the difference when there's an iron curtain. What is declared and what is not declared. What we know and what might be the actual ground reality is there might be differences, which is why US is already very chary. It's already saying that it has a lot of nuclear arsenal, which is completely ungoverned. So although the official figures might seem small, but even a single nuclear missile is quite deadly for all of humanity, not just the nation that is producing it or the nation that is using it. So any nation with a nuclear arsenal is potentially a threat. And if it's a larger arsenal, some of it declared, some of it not declared, is something that should cause concern. So we can't go into China and examine everything that's happening. We don't want there to be another Wuhan moment where that was a biological weapon and you might find yourself uncovering deeper nuclear secrets. So let's not dismiss China as a nuclear threat. It has expansionist plans under Xi Jinping. It has declining economy. It has dissatisfied people. It has an aging population. It's a wounded civilization as of now, and it might retaliate in ways that is not conventional. And that is something that we need to be very wary of. And hence the need to bring China onto the table where where they're forced or they're convinced that they need to sign a deal and adhere to it both.
Shruti Dasgupta, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. It was, of course, a pleasure to talk to you as always. We now move on to our next story, and the US Department of Justice has released a massive trove of millions of files related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Among the 2,000 videos included in this release is a notable nearly 2-hour video of Epstein being questioned about sex crime allegations and his lifestyle. This release was mandated by the Epstein Files Transparency Act, signed into law by President Donald Trump in November of 2025. Video from the night of Epstein's death in 2019 was also made public, though analysis by experts has identified discrepancies and missing minutes in the footage. We move on now. Dozens of workers from auto parts manufacturer Brake Parts Incorporated, a subsidiary of US corporation First Brands Group, maintained vigils and bonfires outside the closed plants in Ciudad Juarez while awaiting severance payments after the company declared bankruptcy in the US. The crisis erupted following the sudden closure of 5 First Brands Group plants on the border, leaving workers uncertain about receiving their compensation. Since the night of January the 25th, BPI employees and workers from other plants established encampments to prevent machinery from being removed without guaranteeing payment of labour debts. First Brands founder Patrick James was indicted for fraud after the bankruptcy that affected lenders Ford and General Motors. Let's in fact listen in to some of the workers awaiting for their payment.
Las puertas de la planta nos cerraron ya y no trabajamos ahorita. Esperamos que nos liquiden. No sé qué tiempo, pero esperamos que nos liquiden al 100%. Que nos sacaron certificaciones, nada, ni por qué, ni no nos explicaron nada y en la planta pues ya no hay nada.
Se agüita uno porque puede ser jale, si no trabajas no comes. Y luego me quitan Infonavit, todo eso los afecta. Así es, todo eso afecta para la economía, pues.
We turn to some tech news next, and Instagram has recovered a brief outage that affected over 10,000 users in the United States. Outage tracking site DowDetector.com reported a total of over 10,000 incidents of experiencing issues with the social media platform as of 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. However, the number of incidents dropped sharply within the next hour, indicating the platform's quick recovery. While the cause of the outage remains unclear, Instagram users in the US were temporarily unable to access the platform, leading to a brief period of frustration for many. The outage comes as social media platforms face increasing scrutiny over their reliability and service interruptions. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. The US and Iran agree to hold talks in Oman on Friday despite sharp differences over the scope of negotiations. Washington seeks to include Iran's missile program, while Tehran says only its nuclear file is on the table. Envoys from Russia and Ukraine meet in Abu Dhabi for US-brokered talks on ending the war. The meeting comes as a Russian cluster munitions attack kills 7 people at a market in Ukraine. The UN chief calls the expiry of the New START treaty a grave moment for global peace and security. He urges the US and Russia to quickly negotiate a new nuclear arms control framework. Donald Trump endorses conservative prosecutor Clay Fuller in a Georgia special election to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene. Trump calls Fuller an America First patriot and a strong supporter of his MAGA agenda. Ukraine's energy minister warns power cuts could intensify in the coming days. He says Russia may launch new air attacks on power and heating networks. A legal rights group says Venezuela frees 22 more prisoners. The releases come as interim government promises slowly continue. We start this hour in US Middle East tensions, and Iran's foreign minister says nuclear talks with the United States are taking place this Friday in Oman. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced on social media that the talks will take place in Muscat at around 10 a.m. local time, and he thanked Oman for making all the necessary arrangements. This comes after earlier reports from US media suggested the talks could be called off over disagreements about both the location and the format. Originally, Iran and the United States had agreed to meet in Istanbul, Turkey. with other Middle Eastern countries taking part as observers. But on Tuesday, Iran proposed moving the talks to Oman and holding them as strictly bilateral talks, focused only on nuclear issues. Earlier reports suggested that Washington has decided to reject Iran's conditions. For now, though, both sides appear set to sit down in Muscat on Friday, with talks set to move forward as scheduled. Joining us now is Major General Sudhakar Ji, an international affairs expert, joining us live from Jaipur. Thank you very much for joining us. As always, it's a great pleasure to talk to you. Iran, of course, here wants to limit nuclear enrichment and likely to raise broader issues such as missiles and, of course, the support for proxy groups from Tehran. Iran insists that these talks stay nuclear. Is this a negotiation or a clash of opposite goals?
Good morning, Thomas. It's equally a great honor and pleasure to be in your show always and every time. And thank you for having invited me. As regards the question which you have raised, well, it's a very serious contradiction to what US is actually staking out or USA is proposing. Having said that, let me dilate the issue very briefly. First and foremost thing, that this meeting in Muscat is the capital of Oman. Oman in the past has been a great peacemaker as far as Iran is concerned or any Middle East is concerned. I would say next to Qatar would be Oman, which has played a very important role in the past for ensuring peace in the region. That is one issue that I want to highlight, because they have linkages to negotiate effectively, to bring or make the stakeholders reach a common end and balancing out all the factors. Second issue is the one which you have raised. Well, Iran as a country, it's a civilizational country, and nobody should underestimate its capability. And today, when we are talking about Iran, it cannot be equated with a country like Venezuela. Talk about the armed forces, talk about its military hardware and the arsenal, talk about the hypersonic missile it has got, and the proxies it is operating, be it the Houthis or Hamas or Hezbollahs, or you call about Hadar al-Saib and host of other militias. So therefore, while it may be a serious contradiction to the expected end state one is trying to achieve, for it to remain relevant and also for self-protection or protection of the country, I don't think Iran will ever forego its nuclear option. It will continue to dithering and flip-flopping. At times it will say that yes, we agree. At times it will say no. And in the background, there is a clandestine activity going on in Iran, whether Thomas, you accept or not. Way back in 2000, April 22nd, if I respect my memory, the editorial in New York Times had given out an article in an op-ed that they have got more than adequate evidence Iran is in possession of the nuclear hardware. So if that be so, it is not once, it has come out number of times, 2006, 2009, 2012. So independent journalism and investigative journalism has always pointed a finger that Iran always had a nuclear warhead. Okay, even if we dismiss that issue, the enriched uranium which Iran has, one is insisting that they should transport it to a third country. It should not be there in the Iran. Now, given the freedom, the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the kind of hammering Iran has been receiving from Israel and USA, do you think that Iran will ever forego? Isn't the example of Ukraine good enough to remind the world that had Ukraine had the nuclear warheads on its soil, perhaps Russia would have never invaded? So that is the reality. Same thing goes for Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, and such like countries, Syria. So therefore, I don't think Iran is a country in 21st century which is surrounded by enemies all over, and particularly Israel, and USA doesn't want Iran to exist in its current military might and form. I don't think they will forego the option of nuclear weapons. Back to you, Thomas.
And of course, the United States has cut formal diplomatic relations with Iran since 1980 after the Iran hostage crisis, and pretty much immediately after the Iranian Revolution of 79. This administration as well, particularly hostile towards Tehran. Of course, we can talk about his first term also after the US quit this 2015 deal and reimposed the sanctions, which of course led to Iran expanding its nuclear enrichment, and disputes piled up. Of course, we're seeing what Donald Trump calls an armada build up in the Persian Gulf right now, and some say Iran is at its most unstable point as it has been since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Can mistrust be reset when it comes to these talks?
A very brilliant and sharp question you have asked, Thomas. There are no quick answers to this because the times are so rapidly changing. They're altering. What is in the morning is changing by midday or by evening, because the leadership in the relevant powers in the world order, they themselves are not showing signatures of stability. And America is the superpower, whether we accept it or not. So therefore, I would say if you look back to 2015, that agreement which was made, JPOC, and Donald Trump in 2018, it pulled back. USA pulled back from that joint comprehensive, that administrative agreement. The central point of that agreement was to prevent Iran from going nuclear, and the sanctions should be lifted. Now, why did Donald Trump withdraw from that agreement in 2018? I have not understood. Had he continued, by now, Iran's nuclear endeavor going nuclear by now would have been diminished to a negligible percentage. Why did he withdraw, and why is he trying to put pressure on Iran now, trying to prevent Iran from going nuclear? This hiatus or the gap between 2018 to 2026, 6 years are good enough for any country like Iran to revive its nuclear architecture and go in for what it actually wanted. By now, I'm very sure a country like Iran would have definitely gone in for tactical nuclear missile, which the world is not taking cognizance of, which is very, very dangerous. So last point is talking about the trust, reset of trust. Thomas, everything is possible, provided the clarity of the end state is clear in the person who's voting the proposal. Is there a clarity in Donald Trump, what is voting today, what is proposing? This is the question coming to my mind. The second question coming to my mind, if he's so serious about preventing Iran from going nuclear, resetting of the trust, does Donald Trump as a leader, does he operate from a platform or realm of trust? I don't think so. Nobody can trust him. When there is a lack of trust in the person who's mooting a proposal, how do you expect Iran to actually, not that I'm supporting Iran, by no means. How do you expect the responder or the recipient or the opposing stakeholder to come up with a similar kind of intensity and passion and truthfulness? That is what the beginning. The whole world is actually victimized today because of lack of trust. The moment we have trust, the entire geopolitical churn will take a U-turn. It will be a about turn, and we'll start seeing signatures of stability and normalcy. Back to you, Thomas.
Major General Sudhakar, as always, it's a great pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much for taking the time in joining us. We'll of course bring you all the updates coming out of those talks and before them as soon as we get them here on the channel. We turn on to our next story and over to Europe, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has revealed that the number of Ukrainian soldiers killed in the war with Russia now stands at 55,000. In an interview with France 2 TV, Zelensky disclosed that this figure includes both professional soldiers and conscripts. He also mentioned a significant number of official missing persons, which adds to the heavy human toll. Zelensky's comments mark a sharp increase from a previous estimate of over 46,000 Ukrainian military deaths made last year in an interview with NBC. The staggering casualties only highlight the devastating impact of the conflict on Ukraine's military and population as the war rages on. We turn on to a related development, and Zelensky has also called for more pressure on Moscow as a new round of talks began in Abu Dhabi. In his nightly address, Zelensky stressed that these negotiations must lead to real peace and not provide Russia with an opportunity to continue its war. He also expected a new prisoner exchange to take place very soon. The US brokered talks are underway as Russia's military continues to strike Ukrainian territory. And earlier, Russian forces struck a market in eastern Ukraine with cluster munitions, leaving at least 7 dead and many others wounded. These attacks come after a record number of ballistic missiles struck Ukraine just yesterday. The situation remains dire as the conflict continues to escalate. Ross Feingold joins us now. He is a political analyst joining us live from Taipei. Ross, thank you very much for joining us here. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Let's first start, of course, with this death toll. This figure is mentioned by Zelensky in this interview. However, some analytical studies estimate the war death total on both sides are around a range from 300,000 to 500,000 individuals. Largely, these public disclosures can often precede policy shifts. Is Zelensky laying groundwork for tougher mobilization, deeper conscription, or eventual political compromises?
Could be all of the above. Certainly the number that he cited in this interview is significantly lower than other studies. And specifically, just to be very clear, we're talking about other studies that have put the number of Ukrainian killed in action as being significantly higher than what President Zelensky said in this interview. He's kind of stuck in the middle here, because if he goes on TV or otherwise publicly says a number that's very large, it could have the opposite effect. It could cause more young men in Ukraine to seek to avoid military service, and it could also cause doubt among Ukraine's major partners, which at the moment are Western European countries as far as who is supplying weapons to Ukraine, whether or not this continues to be a viable investment. And certainly to the extent that he was to acknowledge a much higher death toll, President Trump would probably also go public and say, you see, this is all the more reason why the war needs to come to a speedy end. So he has to juggle all that with the desire to actually be honest and not get caught giving a lie either. So he's in a very, very difficult position on this issue, which may be one reason why Ukraine had previously been very reluctant to release these figures.
And of course, moving to those talks in Abu Dhabi, which have just wrapped up, Russia, of course, hailing the talks as constructive. We are getting limited information, however, coming out of them. What does that mean?
It could mean that Ukraine has not given in yet or completely to the major pressure points, which are coming from not just Russia, but from the Trump administration. And that has to do with the amount of land that Ukraine is prepared to give up, and what would be the parameters within some of those occupied territories that Ukraine basically loses sovereignty over. Will they be demilitarized or not? And we know what some of the other major issues are, like the presence of foreign troops in Ukraine. I've always thought, despite Russia's public position, they have some latitude on that. If there are foreign European troops in Ukraine, they could reach some agreement about how far away they'll be kept from the front lines, for example. But that's probably also still under negotiation. But I think the major issue is still this question of how much territory Ukraine is prepared to give up, not knowing if it'll ever be able to recover it, and what will be the structure under which that territory is going to operate, and specifically what would be the Russian military presence in those occupied territories.
And fighting rages on the ground with aerial strikes crossing border pretty much every single day. How do you think the United States are viewing this coming into these talks? Does Russia benefit from negotiating while fighting?
That's a really interesting question, because over the course of 2025, At times, President Trump publicly expressed his frustration with Russia, and specifically President Putin, for continuing strikes, including strikes on civilian targets, civilian infrastructure, the power grid, or on major cities and civilian targets, while talks were ongoing. And President Trump was very, very frustrated by that. He called out President Putin for doing that while talks were trying to be started or even taking place. And Russia's consistent position has been that they're not going to stop their attacks even while talks are taking place. So the thing to watch in the coming hours is President Trump going to again criticize Russia over this, or is he going to frankly look to keep the pressure on Ukraine to take the deal?
Indeed, and of course, Ross, sanctions are already extensive on Moscow, with now that new development apparently that Donald Trump has convinced India to stop purchasing Russian oil. Military aid to Ukraine, however, inside the United States is politically contested still, especially with his MAGA base. Do you think Washington can realistically still increase pressure on Moscow meaningfully?
Certainly, to the extent that India switches its purchases to the United States or other sources, China might do a little bit of that as well. I think the pressure is still there on Russia. You know, one of the interesting things about this question of sanctions and oil purchases is I would expect, as part of the negotiations that are ongoing, Russia is demanding that should there be a ceasefire, that a lot of these sanctions will be removed and that Russia could kind of return to normal or something close to normal participation in global commerce. But when it comes to something like oil, and of course the Trump administration knows this, they're smart people, what they're trying to do is lock in purchasers like India or some of the European countries that have still been buying energy from Russia but have options like buying natural gas, lock them in to contractual obligations. And that's a total win-win from the United States perspective, because on the one hand, you could give Russia the incentive of removing sanctions, but on the other, you've locked in the buyers to buy elsewhere anyway. So even if sanctions are removed, Russia might not benefit financially.
Ross Feingold, do stay with us as we turn to the United States for our next story. The Washington Post has announced a major layoff, cutting 1/3 of its workforce and scaling back coverage of both sports and foreign news. The cuts impact multiple departments, with the newsroom's sports, local and foreign sections bearing the brunt of the reductions. The move is the latest upheaval at the leading US newspaper, which is owned by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. Over the past few years, the Post has faced a series of staff cuts and buyouts, sparking backlash over some of its editorial decisions. These layoffs are a sign of the pressure traditional news media outlets face as they navigate an evolving media landscape. Ross, what does this really say about the state of legacy media, especially in the United States right now?
It's extraordinarily difficult to compete. They're not just competing with the speed that online media gets stories out, or dealing with their own legacy. Traditional media dealing with their own legacy of their own unique culture and the speed or lack of speed at which they produce content. But in the era where there's social media, there's so many methods where people can get their views and stories, whether it's breaking news and a citizen journalist, or, for example, in the United States, where you have so many government or former government officials who, when they leave government, start producing content on their own channels. You don't really need the traditional media to provide that analysis anymore. You don't need a seasoned reporter necessarily. I mean, they still certainly have a role and do great things, but there are other sources for similar information. And often, again, they're not working under or laboring under internal systems and bureaucracy and culture that exists in a media organization. So it's just very, very difficult for, again, what we call the traditional media to compete in 2026.
And that foreign reporting is often the first casualty in these downturns. What happens to accountability journalism when these foreign bureaus shrink?
people often criticize, I'm an American, so I guess I could say this, people often criticize Americans for their lack of knowledge about what's going on around the world. And the traditional media, including companies like the Washington Post, one of the great things that they've done historically is bring stories from on the ground, what's going on in a war zone, in a rural village, somewhere outside the United States, whether that's Africa, Central South America, Asia, bringing those stories to the audience in the United States. So to the extent they're not doing it there, and the media ecosystem sort of shifts to bigger breaking news. There's so many scholars or people with a career in government who could write something about geopolitical U.S.-China relations, what's the latest in U.S. trade policy or bilateral trade negotiations. Lots and lots of people could really punch out that content quickly. But what the traditional media historically has been very good at, and what will be a big loss here, is that kind of on-the-ground reporting in places around the world and making that information available to Americans.
And 10 years from now, do you think the Washington Post will look recognizable, or is the entire media landscape fundamentally going to be transformed?
That's also a function of who will be the president at the moment. Right now we have a president who is very willing to criticize media, and he often criticizes traditional media, and specifically those outlets that have historically been considered more progressive, more aligned with the Democrats, and more critical with the Republicans. If that continues, if President Trump's successor and the successor wins a second term, so now we're looking going out for like the next 11 years, if it continues to be somebody who's very critical of traditional media, which has been aligned with Democrats, that'll make the operating environment for a Washington Post very, very bad going forward for a long time to come. So to answer your question, they won't be able to exist in the same format that they exist today in 2026. They will continue to lose readership if you have a president who says, that platform is lousy.
Ross Feingold, as always, great pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for taking the time in joining us. We stay in the United States, and Ryan Ruth, the Florida man who tried to assassinate Donald Trump less than 2 months before the 2024 US election, has been sentenced to life in prison. Ruth, who is 59 years old, was convicted last September of 5 criminal counts, including attempted assassination, after representing himself in court. U.S. District Judge Aileen Cannon handed down the sentence in Fort Pierce, Florida, following prosecutors' recommendation for a life term. Ruth had previously asked for a 27-year sentence, claiming that he never intended to kill Trump. The court heard that he had plotted the assassination for months and expressed no remorse. Ruth was arrested after Secret Service agents spotted him hiding with a semi-automatic rifle near Trump's golf course in West Palm Beach. We move on now, and the Trump administration is prepared to allow China's ByteDance to purchase NVIDIA's advanced 8200 AI chips, but the deal remains in limbo because NVIDIA has not agreed to key US conditions. The United States signaled approval for the license about 2 weeks ago, but NVIDIA has pushed back on government's Know Your Customer requirements designed to prevent China's military from accessing the AI technology. NVIDIA says it's only an intermediary between Washington and potential buyers, and that the conditions must be commercially practical or American companies risk losing business to foreign competitors. Chinese authorities have given conditional approval for tech firms, including ByteDance, Tencent and Alibaba, to import H200 chips, but the final terms on both sides are still being worked out. Despite Trump's earlier decision to lift export curbs, national security and other US reviews continue to slow any potential sales, leaving chip shipments to China uncertain. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. For more international news updates, stay tuned on NewsX World.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. The US and Iran agreed to hold talks in Oman on Friday despite sharp differences over the scope of negotiations. Washington seeks to include Iran's missile program, while Tehran says only its nuclear file is on the table. Envoys from Russia and Ukraine meet in Abu Dhabi for US-brokered talks on ending the war. The meeting comes as a Russian cluster munitions attack killed 7 people at a market in Ukraine. Trump says China is considering boosting purchases of US soybeans after what he calls positive talks with Xi Jinping. Beijing may raise buying to 20 million tons, even as it warns Washington over Taiwan arms sales. Taiwan says the Trump-Xi phone call will help stabilize regional security amid rising Chinese military pressure. Beijing calls for mutual respect with Washington while warning over Taiwan. New York City joins the World Health Organization's Global Outbreak Response Network after Trump withdraws the US from the agency. The move by Democratic leaders defies the president and seeks to maintain global health cooperation. The UN chief calls the expiry of the New START treaty a grave moment for global peace and security. He urges the US and Russia to quickly negotiate a new nuclear arms control framework. Donald Trump endorses conservative prosecutor Clay Fuller in a Georgia special election to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene. Trump calls Fuller an America First patriot and a strong supporter of his MAGA agenda. Ukraine's energy minister warns power cuts could intensify in the coming days. He says Russia may launch new air attacks on power and heating networks. We start with developments from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has revealed that the number of Ukrainian soldiers killed in the war with Russia now stands at 55,000. In an interview with France 2 TV, Zelensky disclosed that this figure includes both professional soldiers and conscripts. He also mentioned a significant number of official missing persons, which adds to the heavy human toll. Zelensky's comments mark a sharp increase from a previous estimate of over 46,000 Ukrainian military deaths made last year in an interview with MBC. Joining us to discuss this development is Dr. Satoru Nagao, a fellow at the Hudson Institute. He joins us live from Tokyo in Japan. The Kremlin and Ukraine are reluctant and muddy to usually release statistics like these. Why now has Zelensky given us this figure, and what does it say about the state of the war in contrast to that increase that Zelensky gave last year?
In this case, this is honest number, I think, because last year, yes, the more decreased numbers Ukraine published it, but at the same time, this is war. So uncertain situations, there are many cases they cannot identify what happened. So there are many uncertain situations because the war is something like that. So that's why identifying the number is indeed very difficult. And this year, gradually the front line is a little backing to the Ukraine side. So that's why when the soldier withdraw the position, that is a very vulnerable timing, and there's a possibility some of them has killed, and some others are injured too, because generally maybe 3 times bigger injury could happen. It relies on the medical situation, but at the same time, if we calculate this is 3 times bigger number are injured, and so 50,000 means that 150,000 injured. So in total number is 200,000 soldiers suffered something. Anyways, this is big number. So, but this is 4 years, and compared with the other war in the past, this is not especially big. Not especially big, so that's why Ukraine resists well, I think.
Dr. Nagao, stay with us as we move on to our next update. And the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also called for real peace after a new round of 3-sided talks between Russia, Ukraine and the United States. He stressed that these negotiations must not give Russia an opportunity to continue the war, but instead pressure must be applied on Moscow. Zelensky added that Ukrainians must feel that the situation is moving towards peace and not towards Russia taking advantage and escalating the conflict. He also highlighted that a new exchange of prisoners was expected to occur very soon. Dr. Nagao joins us once again. Following these talks, where do you see the situation? Of course, things on the ground continue to escalate. Civilians have been killed in the past 24 hours, 7 in a Ukrainian market. Is Zelensky correct in making these statements? Do you feel as if these negotiations are truly heading towards peace at this stage?
In this case, a view from President Zelensky, he does not have a choice. Because without support from the United States, the Ukraine cannot continue to fight. So that's why the President Trump wish to end this battle. This means that Ukraine need to follow and adjust the new situation set up by the United States. But at the same time, the difficulty is the decision of Russian side, because Russia continue to attack and expand their territory gradually, little small, but gradually they expand territory. This means that Russia has the motivation to continue the war. So under such kind of situations, from the president of the Ukraine, there is no choice. And he says, under the arrangement of the President Trump, the negotiation is the solution. But view from the Russia, Russia want to continue the war, and so if they show something, the friendly gesture to the Western side or President Trump, this is just a gesture, and the real opinion of the Russia is they want to continue war.
Do stay with us, Dr. Nagao, as we move on to our next story. The Trump administration has announced that it will withdraw around 700 federal immigration enforcement agents from Minnesota, leaving around 2,000 agents in place. The reduction comes after weeks of backlash from the state's Democratic leaders who have opposed the unprecedented deployment of federal agents in the state. The operation, named Operation Metro Surge, has resulted in numerous protests and clashes with residents after 2 U.S. citizens were fatally shot by ICE officers. The White House border czar Tom Homan maintained that the deportation campaign was necessary for public safety, but both Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey called the move insufficient. They continue to demand the end of the operation, which they say has caused harm to local communities and businesses. The drawdown leaves nearly 2,000 ICE agents still deployed in the state, a number that many consider still too high.
Mr. President, speaking of Minneapolis, what did you learn?
I learned that maybe we can use a little bit of a softer touch, but you still have to be tough. These are criminals. We're dealing with really hard.
Joining us now to discuss the ongoing situation in Minnesota is Professor Rohan Gunaratne, an international affairs expert, joining us live from Singapore. Thank you very much for joining us to discuss this. 700 of the nearly 3,000 troops have now withdrawn. Do you think this is enough to de-escalate tensions in this highly volatile situation in Minnesota?
Certainly, Thomas, because the situation in Minnesota has created a lot of unhappiness. And I believe that the decision to withdraw those troops will give a level of comfort and will eventually lead to a settlement on the part of those factions that have disagreed with each other. So also President Trump in many ways has regretted what happened, but he also wants to demonstrate his leadership. That is why he specifically said that they are dealing with very hardcore people. But what is important is, at the end of the day, this is the United States. They have to resolve their disputes and their difficulties. Otherwise, there will be significant unhappiness which will reflect in the midterm elections.
Indeed, and of course now we've seen a different approach. Donald Trump there admitting that a softer touch is needed when it comes to ICE operations. He removed the head of those actions in Minnesota, Gregory Bovino, and has put in his border czar, Tom Homan. Is this a concession from Donald Trump here? And do you think we're going to be seeing a different approach from the US president when it comes to his operations going forward?
I believe so, because Trump has gone deep into the issue and he knows the implications of this discord and discomfort persisting. He knows how it is going to affect his popularity. And of course, he has appointed people whom he trusts. And that is also important, because you have to work with people who you trust, but will also do what is right. So we all hope that the situation in Minnesota will improve. for the sake of building harmony in that great city.
Indeed. And of course, this comes after the shooting of 2 US citizens, the fatal shooting of 2 US citizens. How does the Trump administration look after this? We've seen protests worldwide. We're now approaching a No Kings protest coming at the end of this month, what is said to be the largest anti-government protest in US history. How has these actions in Minnesota affected Donald Trump's national image?
It has affected him very negatively. That is why he has taken a different tone, a more soft approach. That is why he has made some amends. And I hope that this is a learning experience for everyone. Because in a country, if this happens, then there is unhappiness. The scale of protest that you described very clearly demonstrates the sentiments of the people. And there must be a de-escalation, and Trump is now taking very significant steps towards that de-escalation.
Professor Gunaratne, do stay with us as we turn over to our next story. The president of Venezuela's National Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, has announced that the first debate on the general amnesty bill promised by interim President Delcy Rodriguez will take place very soon. Rodriguez explained that the amnesty law, which was initiated by President Delcy Rodriguez, will be presented to the National Assembly for its first discussion after further evaluation of its scope. According to Rodriguez, the law is designed to provide mechanisms for people to regain their freedom, provided they fall within the law's scope. Let's listen into what Jorge Rodriguez had to say.
La ley de amnistía es una iniciativa de la Presidenta de la República, así lo planteó en el inicio del año judicial. Saliendo de aquí, voy a una reunión donde vamos a evaluar los alcances de esa iniciativa para saber cuándo vamos a llevar a la Asamblea Nacional para que dé la primera discusión esa ley. Será muy pronto. La presidenta encargada, Delcy Rodríguez, propone una ley de amnistía que lo que hace es establecer los mecanismos a través de las personas puedan recuperar la libertad siempre y cuando estén dentro de los sujetos establecidos en esa ley.
Opposition member Alberto Galindez weighed in, stating that this process will eventually lead to an election, but only after stability and economic recovery in Venezuela have been achieved. Galindez also reflected on the political failure in Venezuela, calling the current situation a terrible image that will stay with the country for a very long time. Meanwhile, students and workers are gathering in front of the University of Carabobo in Venezuela to call for the acceleration of the general amnesty law that would lead to the release of all political prisoners currently held in Venezuela. Professor Gunaratne joins us once again. Of course, this comes after the capture of Nicolas Maduro, with some people saying that the interim government, the interim leader is pushing forward these laws in order to appease the Trump administration. Is Donald Trump in effect approving these laws? And is Donald Trump, do you think, will he be satisfied in the coming future?
Certainly he will be. Let me give you a little bit of background for your audience. That is, Maduro's mentor was Hugo Chavez, and he imprisoned a lot of people during the Bolivian revolution, his enemies. And today we have seen a shift in that mindset, especially after US intervention and after Maduro is gone. So the Americans themselves are very keen that those prisoners are released so that there will be harmony and stability in Venezuela. Right now, the shift is towards being leftist, But after the release of those prisoners, they will have a more stable country. Because one of Trump's challenges was that China and Russia, Iran, Lebanese Hezbollah, the Colombian groups, FARC, ELN, they were all operating in Venezuela. But when the political ideology changes in Venezuela, Venezuela will become a less of a security threat to the United States and to President Trump.
Do stay with us, Professor Gunaratne, once again as we move on to a related development. And the Venezuelan interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, has held high-level meetings with oil executives from Spain's Repsol and France's Morel and Prom in Caracas, about a month after the United States removed Nicolas Maduro from power. PDVSA, a state-owned oil company, said that Rodriguez met with Repsol to discuss strengthening Venezuela's energy sovereignty and win-win cooperation amid sanctions and market turmoil. She also met with Morel and Prom leaders to consolidate strategic alliances to boost the country's energy production capacity. The meetings come as Venezuela moves to open its oil sector to foreign engagement and reform energy laws to revive production after years of decline and sanctions. Analysts say the outcomes of these talks could have broader implications for the country's economic recovery and its position in global energy markets. Professor Gunaratne, previously, Donald Trump gathered all US oil executives in the White House, some leading CEOs, particularly from the likes of Exxon in the US. They called Venezuela uninvestable. Is Delcy Rodriguez putting the correct measures in to prove that statement wrong?
Definitely, we have seen that the interim president and also the opposition, they are very keen for all the sanctions to be lifted so that Venezuela can become an international player. It's a very resource-rich country. I am very confident that ExxonMobil and other American, European, and other firms will invest in Venezuela. Venezuela will not only be a playing ground for countries that the Americans have classified as inimical. That way, Venezuela has a very good chance of recovery and becoming a stable and economically viable nation in the coming months and coming years.
And of course, there was huge skepticism coming out of the international community when Donald Trump first captured Nicolas Maduro. He then said that the United States was going to run Venezuela. However, do you think the government is taking the right action to please the Americans? Do you think that Delcy Rodriguez and their government are satisfying Donald Trump in cooperating with these oil companies, not just from the United States, but also from the likes of Europe as well?
The new administrators and the existing administrators and the opposition in Venezuela, they're working together because they want to make sure that Trump is their friend, because they have seen the consequences of an angry Trump surgically extracting the elected president. So I believe that this is the time for Venezuela for those sanctions to be removed so that Venezuela will be able to work with both the East and the West and will be a friend of the United States. Trump, in many ways, revived what you call the Monroe Doctrine. That is, countries neighboring the United States should not do anything to harm or hurt the United States. Trump perceived Maduro as an enemy, as an opponent, as an adversary. Today, he doesn't think so. Today, he has extended the hand of friendship. He has got the Americans to go and invest and do business. Not only that, today the Europeans are moving in a very significant way to work with Venezuela.
Professor Rohan Gunaratne, thank you so much for joining us. As always, it is a great pleasure. Indigenous people and politicians in New Zealand have come together to celebrate Waitangi Day, marking 186 years since the signing of the country's founding document in 1840. The Treaty of Waitangi was signed between Maori chiefs and representatives of British rule. This year, Prime Minister Christopher Luxon vowed to deliver improved outcomes for the Indigenous community, stressing that Maoris want the same as non-Maoris in terms of health, education and other key areas. Let's in fact listen in to what the New Zealand Prime Minister has said.
Wanting to partner with Māori and iwi to improve outcomes for Māori, and we're working our way systematically through that. You can do a whole bunch of performative stuff, but actually you've got to get into the real work to actually deliver improved outcomes. And under successive governments, you have to say, how do we lift education outcomes? How are we going to lift health outcomes? How do we lift crime and safety outcomes across the country? And how do we lift
Global software stocks have taken a sharp hit this week, with the S&P 500 software and services index falling almost 13% over 6 straight sessions. The sector has lost a staggering $830 billion in market value since January the 28th. The sell-off comes as investors assess the impact of artificial intelligence on software companies, with AI now posed as a potential threat instead of just a growth driver. A new legal tool from AI company Anthropic has exacerbated the concerns, demonstrating how AI is entering the lucrative enterprise business market. If successful, AI's integration into these sectors could cause a massive disruption in industries like finance, law and coding. While some analysts warn the sell-off could be an overreaction, the fear that AI could alter the industry landscape is real. The sell-off has been driven by fears that AI competition could narrow the moats that protect established businesses. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reforms, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. The US and Iran agree to hold talks in Oman on Friday despite sharp differences over the scope of negotiations. Washington seeks to include Iran's missile program, while Tehran says only its nuclear file is on the table. Envoys from Russia and Ukraine meet in Abu Dhabi for US-brokered talks on ending the war. The meeting comes as a Russian cluster munitions attack kills 7 people at a market in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Kiev's energy minister warns power cuts could intensify in the coming days. He says Russia may launch new air attacks on power and heating networks. The UN chief calls the expiry of the New START treaty a grave moment for global peace and security. He urges the US and Russia to quickly negotiate a new nuclear arms control framework. A legal rights group says Venezuela frees 22 more prisoners. The releases come as interim government promises slowly continue. Gaza health officials say Israeli tank shelling and airstrikes killed 24 Palestinians, including 7 children. The dead include a medic killed while responding to a strike in Khan Yunis. Trump says China is considering boosting purchases of US soybeans after what he calls positive talks with Xi Jinping. Beijing may raise buying to 20 million tons, even as it warns Washington over Taiwan arms sales. Donald Trump endorses conservative prosecutor Clay Fuller in a Georgia special election to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene. Trump calls Fuller an America First patriot and a strong supporter of his MAGA agenda. US President Donald Trump says he had what he called an excellent phone conversation with Chinese President Xi Jinping, discussing a wide range of global issues, including trade, energy, Taiwan, Iran, and Russia's war in Ukraine. The call came just hours after President Xi spoke with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, with both leaders vowing to deepen ties amid what they described as a turbulent global environment. Posting on Truth Social, Trump said the discussion was all very positive, adding that both he and Xi recognized the importance of maintaining strong ties. The US president says he is expected to visit China in April and has continued to emphasize his personal rapport with Xi, even as Washington and Beijing clash over trade, technology, and Taiwan. China's state media said the two leaders agreed differences could be managed through mutual respect, while reaffirming that Taiwan remains a core priority for Beijing. Joining us now on the broadcast is Ross Feingold, a political analyst. He joins us live from the Taiwanese capital of Taipei. Thank you very much, Ross, for joining us here on the broadcast. This relationship between Xi and Trump, of course, Trump emphasizing this personal rapport with the Chinese president. However, of course, a key issue remains Taiwan. How do you think the two leaders will manage such an issue? Of course, acknowledging Beijing's firm stance of reunification.
And the easy way out for both sides is to simply stick to their long time and well-known positions. So for China, that is insisting that Taiwan is part of the People's Republic of China, not renouncing the use of force to take over Taiwan. For the United States, it's basically saying we understand what the Chinese position is. We don't necessarily agree with it, and we will continue to sell weapons to Taiwan, something that the United States is obligated to do under a domestic law called the Taiwan Relations Act, and basically continue to have the same interaction that it's always had with Taiwan, even though it's not called diplomatic relations, and there's lots of effort that goes into saying it's unofficial so that China doesn't get upset every time there's interaction between the US and Taiwan governments. And the important part also would be whether or not President Trump says the United States will send troops to defend Taiwan if there is a war, which up to now, President Trump has not been willing to say. President Biden said that multiple times. Each time his staff quickly said, no, he didn't mean that. There's no change in policy. So to make a long story short, and to answer your question, both sides will probably just say the same things that they've always said and do the same things that they've always done.
And in terms of trade, of course, both countries remain crucial to one another. How do you see that relationship developing while ties on the diplomatic front when it comes to certain foreign policy issues remain different?
There were a few things going on with trade. Clearly, the United States itself, and as well as putting pressure on countries that are close to the United States, whether that's in Europe, in Central and South America, and here in East Asia, the United States is currently pressuring companies and countries not to rely on China so much. This is so-called de-risking or decoupling, as some people might call it. Reduce reliance on goods made in China, whether that's electronics or pharmaceuticals or other products. At the same time, Trump has clearly said that he's okay with the U.S. selling stuff to China, whether that's agricultural products or other made in the USA products. And he'd like China to buy more U.S. energy instead of buying from Russia or the Middle East. And also Trump has indicated, as he's done with other major markets around the world, whether it's the European Union or India, he wants those countries to remove trade barriers for United States companies to do business in those countries. So again, just like President Trump is eager for U.S. companies to sell stuff from the U.S. to China, he also seems eager to facilitate American companies doing business in China as well. The one thing, again, he seems to be pursuing, as he did in his first term, is to buy less from China.
And Ross, this talk came after Russian President Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping had a phone call vowing to deepen ties. Of course, the Russia-Ukraine war has been the forefront of Donald Trump's agenda to solve foreign policy-wise. Do you think China can realistically pressure Russia to change course in Ukraine? And of course, if China claims this neutrality, which of course it does, but also deepens ties with Moscow, is that neutrality credible?
Ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, there's been this hope that China would put pressure on Russia to pull back, to end the war, to reach a ceasefire. That has been going on literally since day one, whether it was the Biden administration, European countries, or even Ukraine itself and President Zelensky. There's been this repeated call for China to put pressure on Russia, and it's just never happened. It's not going to happen. Now, maybe behind closed doors, when senior Chinese officials meet with senior Russian officials, they give that message. But publicly, at least, very clearly, China has continued to support Russia, whether that's through trade or not supporting any initiatives globally to punish Russia. So when they say they have this strong relationship, they really do mean it. However, at the same time, a lot of people speculate that China likes the war to go on because it's causing disagreements among the Western countries. It actually keeps Russia's economy and military in a weak state. And for China, that's a better situation. I actually think China would prefer the war to end. It would prefer to do business with Russia without the threat of international sanctions. It would like to start buying agricultural products from Ukraine again. It would like global food prices to come down. So I think China does actually benefit from the end of the war, but it's not going to be the facilitator for the end of the war to happen.
And Donald Trump, once again, boasting his personal diplomacy strategy, frequently emphasizing his personal rapport with Xi. Do you think that strategy is effective when coming to dealing with leaders like the Chinese president?
It depends what issue one wants to prioritize. If one wants to prioritize trade, for example, the fact is President Trump has negotiated a number of agreements with countries around the world of varying sizes, but some of them are very large trading partners like the EU, Japan, and South Korea. And those deals have been pretty good for the United States if the money actually shows up as far as the investment commitments are concerned. And part of the reason those deals were negotiated is Trump gets along well one-on-one with a number of those leaders. That's just the reality, even though we often think of Trump as criticizing foreign leaders, most notably Trudeau and more recently Carney in Canada. But again, some of those one-on-one meetings, whether it's with von der Leyen or the leaders of Japan and South Korea, President Trump he's his gracious host, and they get along well. It's all smiles. So that seems to be President Trump's strategy with Xi Jinping at the moment. Again, it did bring about a trade truce last year. There is the possibility of China buying significantly more U.S. agricultural and energy products, and also the potential for U.S. companies to have better access to the Chinese market, all of which is what Trump seems to be pursuing at the moment. So at least for now, it seems that President Trump wants to emphasize the good personal relationship he has with Xi Jinping.
Ross Feingold, do stay with us as we move over the Taiwan Strait for our next story. And the Taiwanese president, Lai Ching-te, says that relations between Taiwan and the US are rock solid and cooperation programs will continue and not change after Chinese President Xi Jinping discussed Taiwan with US President Donald Trump. In a call, Xi told Trump that the US should carefully handle arms sales to the island that Beijing views as its own territory. Lai expressed that Taiwan and the US have strong channels of communication, adding that US commitments to Taiwan also remain unchanged. Let's listen in.
台美关系坚如磐石，各项合作计划持续进行，不会改变。我希望国人同胞都能够支持政府、支持国家，让我们一起携手前进。我们国家一定可以越来越好。去年的经济成长率高达8.63%，股市已经突破3万点，就业情况15年来最好。所以，当我们国家持续在有这些重大成果的时候，我们的国防一定要持续强化，有强大的国防保护我们国家主权，维护民主自由的生活方式，我们这些重大成果也才有办法保障。
Ross, what is Lai signaling there by calling the US-Taiwan ties rock solid, particularly after that phone call between Trump and Xi?
Rock solid, this is a term that recent leaders of Taiwan have used, including Lai's predecessor, President Tsai Ing-wen, and now President Lai himself. So it's kind of the strongest possible phrase they could think of to assure the public here in Taiwan that relations between the U.S. and Taiwan remain close. There's constant speculation among critics of President Lai here in Taiwan that the U.S. commitments to Taiwan are not as strong as the government portrays it. Here in Taiwan, they call this America skepticism or skepticism towards the United States, and the government has to combat that. And it's understandable that they would, and it's understandable that President Lai and his team want to reassure the public that even though President Trump has phone calls with Xi Jinping, met Xi Jinping last October, President Trump is going to visit China and says all these nice things about Xi Jinping. At the same time, U.S. commitments to Taiwan, whether that's arms sales or in the trade space, continue to move along. And to be fair to President Lai, he is correct. The U.S. did announce a major weapons sale to Taiwan last year. The U.S. just reached a trade agreement with Taiwan. There's a number of dialogue mechanisms between the two governments covering trade and technology that are ongoing. So yes, it's correct to say that relations between the U.S. and Taiwan are strong. But what we really don't know is would President Trump or a future U.S. president send troops to defend Taiwan? And there's no way that we could possibly know that because there's no treaty. And that decision will be made by the U.S. president if and when such an emergency occurs.
And do you think America's long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity on Taiwan is becoming harder to sustain, particularly under the Trump administration?
It certainly looks for now that President Trump wants to maintain that strategy. That's why whenever he's asked, he tends to give the same answer, which is, I'm not going to say what I would do if there is an emergency, an invasion by China. He has said in the past that he would impose tremendous tariffs on Chinese goods if China were to attack Taiwan. He's also said Xi Jinping knows what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to say so. So one thing for sure is President Trump has not committed to sending U.S. troops. He's never directly said that. So from that perspective, President Trump looks set to continue the policy of strategic ambiguity.
The Organization of American States,
Ross
OAS, had an approved budget.
Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It was a pleasure to talk to you as always. We now turn on to our next story, and the family of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, the mother of NBC's Today Show anchor Savannah Guthrie, is urgently searching for her after she vanished from her home near Tucson, Arizona. Authorities believe she was abducted as she has limited mobility and could not have left her home unassisted. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos called the case a kidnapping, and investigators are desperate for any tips. Guthrie's family, including Savannah, has posted emotional appeals begging for information and pleading for her safe return. On Wednesday, President Donald Trump announced that federal agents would assist in the search efforts. The family remains hopeful and is relying on the public's help to bring Nancy home safely. Listen in to what the American news anchor posted on her social media.
On behalf of our family, we want to thank all of you for the prayers for our beloved mom, Nancy. We feel them, and we continue to believe that she feels them too. Our mom is a kind, faithful, loyal, fiercely loving woman of goodness and light. She's funny, spunky, and clever. She has grandchildren that adore her and crowd around her and cover her with kisses. She loves fun and adventure. She is a devoted friend. She is full of kindness and knowledge. Talk to her and you'll see.
The light is missing from our lives. Nancy is our mother. We are her children. She is our beacon. She holds fast to joy in all of life's circumstances. She chooses joy day after day, despite having already passed through great trials of pain and grief. We are always going to be merely human, just normal human people who need our mom. Mama, if you're listening, we need you to come home. We miss you.
Our mom is our heart and our home. She is 84 years old. Her health, her heart is fragile. She lives in constant pain. She is without any medicine. She needs it to survive. She needs it not to suffer. We too have heard the reports about a ransom letter in the media. As a family, we are doing everything that we can. We are ready to talk. However, we live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know, without a doubt, that she is alive and that you have her. We want to hear from you, and we are ready to listen. Please reach out to us. Mommy, if you are hearing this, you are a strong woman. You are God's precious daughter, Nancy. We believe and know that even in this valley, He is with you. Everyone is looking for you, Mommy, everywhere. We will not rest. Your children will not rest until we are together again. We speak to you every moment, and we pray without ceasing, and we rejoice in advance for the day that we hold you in our arms again. We love you, Mom.
We love you, Mom. Stay strong.
We love you.
We'll bring you more on that developing situation as it develops. Of course, we stay in North America as we turn to our next story, and the Colombian President Gustavo Petro addressed the Organization of American States Permanent Council in Washington on Wednesday, questioning the relevance of multilateral institutions and calling for global democratic reform. Petro met with OAS Secretary General Albert Ramdin before his intervention on his third day visiting Washington. The Colombian leader criticized the United Nations for failing to prevent what he described as a genocide in Gaza, stating its existence was being questioned due to its lack of power. Petro proposed a dialogue between civilizations and global democracy as alternatives to weakened multilateral institutions, warning that humanity had limited time to address climate and social crises. He also addressed the fentanyl crisis, describing it as a deadly poison rather than a psychoactive substance that reflects a humanity without hope or direction. Let's listen in to what Petro said.
Si Naciones Unidas fue fundada para que no hubiera más genocidio como el que cometió el Estado alemán de los nazis, frente a soviéticos, chinos, con los japoneses y judíos y otros pueblos del mundo. Si fue fundada para eso y no pudo detener el genocidio en Gaza, ¿para qué sirve? Está cuestionada su existencia, así de simple. No tiene poder.
Matthew Vadum joins us now, an American journalist and author. He joins us live from the American capital of Washington. Matthew, thank you very much for discussing this story with us. Of course, this comes as Donald Trump met Petro in the White House, a significant meeting of two clashing ideologies. But this visit, an analysis of the Western Hemisphere and some strong statements coming out from the Colombian president. What does Gustavo Petro mean by questioning the relevance of multilateral institutions, in particular, of course, the United Nations?
I think that Gustavo Petro means that these large international organizations are not left-wing enough. He wants for example, he wants the OAS, the Organization of American States, by American states, meaning the Western Hemisphere, North and South American, and Latin American countries. He wants them to have much more of a focus on, global warming policies and redistribution of wealth and the things that fall in with his socialist worldview. Remember, he was a communist guerrilla fighter before in a terrorist group in a revolutionary group anyway, before he became president of Colombia. So when he is criticizing multilateral organizations, it is because he doesn't believe they lean far enough to the left. And that's the direction he wants to push them in, including the Organization of American States.
And Matthew, what have you made of Petro's visit to the United States? Of course, Donald Trump imposed sanctions on the Colombian president and issued some pretty aggravating statements towards him directly after the United States captured President Nicolas Maduro. Have you seen his visit as valuable to the Western Hemisphere?
I don't know if it's valuable to. I don't know if Petro contributes anything of value to the world, but he is doing this to improve his standing. Remember, he doesn't like that the United States invaded Venezuela and seized Nicolas Maduro on drug charges and brought him back to the United States to stand trial. So, he is a little insecure, and if I were him, I would be too. And he is trying to the extent that he can, play nice with Donald Trump, because he is afraid of what the United States might do to him. This is the first leftist president that Colombia has ever had, to the best of my knowledge, and he is in he's in uncharted waters, and I can see why he feels the need to go on these public relations campaigns, to go on a world tour in order to bolster his image abroad and at home. This is self-protection.
Matthew, is cooperation not important, though, given the fact that the United States and Colombia are long-time allies? Biden, of course, labeled Colombia a crucial non-NATO ally previously, and Petro, of course, is a democratically elected leader.
Well, he's a democratic socialist, which means he's a Marxist. But it is important that Colombia and the United States have a good relationship. They have been friendly for a long time, and it could be that President Petro recognizes that he's gone a little bit too far, like when he visited the United States a few months ago and got riled up in a speech in New York and urged U.S. soldiers to mutiny against President Trump. And I thought, wow, I'm surprised he wasn't expelled immediately as persona non grata from the United States. So I think he probably recognizes that he's gone a little bit too far, and he's trying to make the best of a bad situation, and he's trying to restore some of the trying to make the relationship between Colombia and the United States work better than it has over the last few months.
We've seen Donald Trump meet with people of opposing ideologies, of course, the likes of Zoran Mamdani in the Oval Office. We've seen a meeting between Lula da Silva and Trump. Of course, verbal differences have occurred, and sanctions have even been involved with a number of these leaders. But does that show Donald Trump's openness and willingness to work with people with opposing ideologies?
Certainly, he's the president, and he recognizes that he's the head of state and for the United States, and he needs to reach out to people who have opposing political viewpoints. Look how soon after Zoran Mamdani, the communist, now mayor of New York City, was elected, he invited him to the White House and gave him a very friendly reception, because New York is a big, important city in the United States, and it's probably a good idea for the president of the United States and the mayor of New York City to have a working relationship. So, Donald Trump talks trash, to use an expression, a lot of the time, denounces people, writes, seemingly unhinged social media posts on his website, Truth Social. But, when he comes face to face, he's willing, to talk to people. And he's not, ultimately, he is pragmatic. He knows when things are not going his way, and he knows how to pull back. For example, even though he believes very firmly in the ICE mission of deporting illegal aliens, he recognizes that the public has, to an extent, recoiled at some of the more aggressive tactics that federal immigration agents have been using, and so he's dialed back the campaign a bit, bowing to public sentiment. So, he wants to do things a certain way, but if he sees that it's not working, he is willing to change course.
Matthew Vadum, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us. Pleasure to talk to you as always. But that is all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. The US and Iran agreed to hold talks in Oman on Friday despite sharp differences over the scope of negotiations. Washington seeks to include Iran's missile program, while Tehran says only its nuclear file is on the table. Envoys from Russia and Ukraine meet in Abu Dhabi for US-brokered talks on ending the war. The meeting comes as a Russian cluster munitions attack kills 7 people at a market in Ukraine. Trump says China is considering boosting purchases of US soybeans after what he calls positive talks with Xi Jinping. Beijing may raise buying to 20 million tons, even as it warns Washington over Taiwan arms sales. Taiwan says the Trump-Xi phone call will help stabilize regional security amid rising Chinese military pressure. Beijing calls for mutual respect with Washington while warning over Taiwan. New York City joins the World Health Organization's Global Outbreak Response Network after Trump withdraws the US from the agency. The move by Democratic leaders defies the president and seeks to maintain global health cooperation. The UN chief calls the expiry of the New START treaty a grave moment for global peace and security. He urges the US and Russia to quickly negotiate a new nuclear arms control framework. Donald Trump endorses conservative prosecutor Clay Fuller in a Georgia special election to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene. Trump calls Fuller an America First patriot and a strong supporter of his MAGA agenda. Ukraine's energy minister warns power cuts could intensify in the coming days. He says Russia may launch new air attacks on power and heating networks. Those are the headlines for the hour. We start with our top story. World leaders attended a ministerial meeting on critical minerals hosted by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Rubio said 55 countries attended the talks in Washington, all with varying refining or mining capabilities. Meanwhile, US Vice President J.D. Vance unveiled plans to marshal allies into a preferential trade bloc for critical minerals, proposing coordinated price floors as Washington escalates efforts to loosen China's grip on minerals crucial to advanced manufacturing. Rubio stated that building a trade bloc was crucial to preventing any one country or an international crisis from disrupting supply chains. President Donald Trump's administration has stepped up efforts to secure US supplies of critical minerals after China rattled senior officials and global markets last year by withholding rare earths required by American automakers and other industrial manufacturers. Let's in fact listen in to what Rubio and J.D. Vance had to say.
We have 55 partners that we're hoping to enter into collaboration with. Many have already signed on, and the goal here is very simple. We all understand that having a reliable global supply chains and critical minerals and processed and finished materials are critical to everything we do. As I pointed out in my opening statements to the group, and I think this is a broader mistake made by the industrialized and developed world, as we all sort of fell in love with the design of these things, but forgot that in order to design something, you have to be able to build it. And in order to build it, you have to have the fundamental materials necessary to make it with. That's the key goal of a critical mineral supply. And today it's heavily concentrated in the hands of one country. And that lends itself to, at worst case scenario, being used as a tool of leverage in geopolitics, but it also lends itself to any sort of disruptions, like a pandemic or anything that could political instability.
And on Monday, the Trump administration announced Project Vault, America's first ever domestic critical minerals stockpile. With these moves, we intend to build an ironclad network of new industrial supply chains to span the entire nation. We're going to create good paying jobs, skilled jobs for the American labor force, and those people, those great workers, are going to be securing a new era of prosperity for American families, and I believe for many people all over the world.
Andrew K.P. Leung joins us now, a China strategist joining us live from Hong Kong. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us. This, of course, is in response to China's dominant and growing rare earth capabilities. How will Beijing be looking at this summit, and will it be in any way threatened by it?
Well, I think that China was forced to resort to using its dominance on rare earths to counter President Trump's coercion. It's not as if China just uses mineral dominance just to get what it wanted in the first place, because the whole thing was sparked off by Trump's tariffs and by Trump's coercion, and in fact is predatory tactics using the dominance of the US dollar, the US military, to cover other countries into submission. However, the China's dominance over the rare earths supply chain did not happen on day one. It was the result of decades of Western countries outsourcing the processing of these rare earth minerals to China because they are highly polluting, some of them even radioactive. But they are all very, very complicated because it depends on the final product. Each product requires different minerals, and each different minerals require different, very intricate, as I said, often polluting processes. And all these skills and technologies and the supply chain gradually coalesce over decades and at great pain to China. For example, the environmental costs and so on, to be able to reach this position. And of course, this position was at the background, and China was forced to resort to it. Now, President Trump's plan is to rally the rest of the world to form a kind of alliance. This is understandable, but then, as I said, it's not the supply, because minerals you can find a great deal, even within the United States and also in Australia, in Ukraine, and other countries. It is not as if the world lacks minerals, but even though the supply, of course, at the moment is concentrated in China to the extent of about 60%, but then the dominance is in the processing, the final processes, because even before this trade war, a lot of the minerals were exported, rare earth minerals exported from the United States, because, as I said, the United States has rare earths as well, for processing in China. So this situation is unlikely to change anytime soon. But however, this alliance, of course, is the first step. It would pave the way for exchange information, to continue the coordinate efforts to develop these alternative supplies, and of course to hone the skills. But this is unlikely to result in concrete improvements over weeks. It's likely to take years and if not decades.
Andrew, do you think that any singular nation or even this trade bloc could soon rival that of China's? And why has it taken the United States and other allies to come to this realization that rare earth capabilities are really driving and at the forefront of trade, modern trade?
Well, it's just that if you have a situation which is normal, you tend to forget about it, because the rare earths, as I said, were all processed in China, and even though the rare earths came from other countries, including the United States, they were exported to China for processing, and the processing very, very complicated and highly polluting. But that nothing happened, and nothing adverse happened. So this was taken for granted until China was forced to resort to this as a countermeasure. And of course, it's not just against the United States, stopping the rare earth to be exported to the United States as a countermeasure, but because you can't just stop the export of rare earths, processed rare earths, just to the United States if you allow the export to Americans' allies, because those allies could re-export the rare earths to the United States. And hence, China recently imposed a global management system requiring the application and grant of permits the world over. And this is, again, it's not suggest that China is targeting the other allies, but to maintain strict control over rare earths as an effective countermeasure. And China has no other means of achieving of using this as a countermeasure unless it has a global kind of control system. And that is what happened. And of course, with a global control, other countries will be affected as well.
Do stay with us as we turn to our next story, and we head to the Indian subcontinent. And India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar met with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent following the trade deal announced by President Donald Trump. The two sides discussed a range of issues aimed at strengthening US-India ties. At the meeting, both countries agreed to formalize cooperation on critical minerals, a move seen as essential to securing supply chains for emerging technologies. Jaishankar also underlined the challenge of excessive concentration in the supply of these critical minerals and expressed India's support for US initiatives to de-risk these chains. The discussions included several key topics such as trade, nuclear cooperation, defense and technology. Jaishankar said both sides agreed to hold early meetings to advance these shared interests. These meetings came just days after a call between US President Donald Trump and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi announcing new economic and trade moves. Andrew KP Leung joins us once again. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us. Are Washington-New Delhi relations now thawed out completely, given that, of course, we saw a bit of friction between the governments and the administrations in India and the United States alike? Is this new horizons for that relationship?
Well, this is a manifestation of calibration and recalibration because the whole world order and the whole world trading system have been totally torn apart by President Trump's predatory hegemony, using its unilateral coercive dominance to extract benefits from not only from adversaries but from allies as well, including tariffs and other measures. So you can see that the European Union is recalibrating its relationship with India, just having signed a mother of all free trade agreement with India. You can say that you can see that the United Kingdom Prime Minister is visiting China. And of course, the United States wants to force India to cease buying oil from Russia and to buy more stuff from the United States. And India, of course, is now pushed into the situation of finding its feet, recalibrating relationship with the European Union, but also not making itself an enemy of Russia, but also trying to mend the fences with President Trump, and hence this trade deal between the United States and India, which after all would mandate India to buy a lot of stuff from the United States. So I think that from the point of view of the United States, it is another win for President Trump. From the point of view of India, it says that it is seen as a recalibration of relationships around the world, rather than just be held to hostage by President Trump's recent policies.
What do you think spurred this deal on? Of course, this comes as India and the European Union signed a new trade deal, and of course, a flurry of visits from Western allies to China. Do you think that pushed Washington towards this deal?
I think what's pushing this deal recently is against President Trump, the Trump administration's obsession with its vulnerability to rare earths, and hence this trade deal also tries to bring India on board on processing rare earths, and also in defense, because the United States doesn't want to be pushed out of the Asia Pacific entirely, and hence wants to double down on its military alliance with a number of countries, including India, Australia, Japan, South Korea, as an offshore balancing against China, while pivoting towards the Western Hemisphere.
Okay, Andrew KP Leung, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us. It's a great pleasure to have you on the programme, as always. We move now to some breaking news, and Russia's ambassador to the United States, Dmitriev, has called the latest meetings between Russia and the US in Abu Dhabi a positive step towards restoring diplomatic relations. Despite pressure from European Union and UK officials, Dmitriev noted significant movement and progress on a potential peace deal. He added that active efforts are underway to strengthen and restore relations between the two countries, which have been strained in recent years. This development comes amid global efforts to resolve tensions and engage in diplomatic talks, with both sides working to overcome difficulties and rebuild a stable relationship. Let's turn to the United States next, and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has stated that the US is ready to meet with Iran this week, but any talks must include discussions on the country's missile and nuclear programs. Rubio said the US is prepared to meet if Iran agrees to engage, but noted that the format for the meeting could still be subject to change. He added that the Iranians had expressed interest in meeting and talking, but any meaningful discussions would have to address Iran's ballistic missiles, terrorist sponsorship, nuclear program, and human rights issues. The US is expected to finalize plans for the meeting, which may take place in Oman on Friday. Let's listen in to what Marco Rubio had to say on the issue.
Look, I think in order for talks to actually lead to something meaningful, they will have to include certain things. And that includes the range of their ballistic missiles. That includes their sponsorship of terrorist organizations across the region. That includes the nuclear program, and that includes the treatment of the... And obviously beyond that, the president retains a number of options to how he responds to that and future events. But as far as the talks are concerned, I think the Iranians had agreed to a certain format. For whatever reason, it's changed in their system or what have you. We'll see if we can get back to the right place. But the United States is prepared to meet with them. I think it was scheduled for Friday. Steve is ready to go. He'll be prepared for that. If the Iranians want to meet, we're ready. They've expressed an interest in meeting and talking. If they change their mind, we're fine with that too. We prefer to meet and talk.
This comes as those talks are scheduled for Friday in Muscat, Oman, as Donald Trump's so-called armada waits in the Persian Gulf at the possibility of US military action in Iran. Joining us now is Major General Gigi Davidi, a professor of international relations and strategic studies. He joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us. Of course, Major General, this is all about trust, a thing which is very much not present between these two powers. The United States, of course, struck their nuclear bases at the end of that 12-day war with Israel last year. And now, of course, Donald Trump mulling over military action at a time where Iran's regime, according to analysts, is at its weakest. Given the United States' demands and Iran's statements that only nuclear talks are on the table, do you see these talks, if they are to take place, of having any positive outcome whatsoever?
Well, Thomas, you're right, absolutely, that the degree of mistrust between US and Iran is very, very wide, and there's no commonality or meeting point between the two. In fact, these talks also, as Marco Rubio had stated, that there's a difference of perspective or positions. Even the agenda of talks that is concerned, because Iran only wants the talks to be restricted to the nuclear issues, whereas America wants the scope to be widened and to include beyond nuclear issues like Iranian missile program, which is very robust. Incidentally, Iran has a arsenal of 3,000 odd missiles, and some of them have range over around 3,000 kilometers, which is a serious concern for the Americans. And beyond that, they also want the Iranians to commit to rein in these proxy, non-state actors like Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas. And of course, the human rights issues, which is very important because the current tension has been triggered by the hard, heavy-handed approach that are adopted by the Iranian regime to put down the student protest, and which has resulted in thousands of people killed and also taken into custody. So the point is, Thomas, that talks are taking place. That's a positive sign. Whether they will go ahead, that's a big question mark, because the perspectives and position taken by the two sides do not actually align with each other, and therefore, and there's a big question mark whether the talks will result in any positive outcome. But the other side, flip side, is the talks are taking place. That's very important because the tension is very high in the region with Abraham Lincoln-based Armada, which is anchored in the waters of the West Asia. Thomas.
And of course, talks ended previously. They also took place in Oman with the start of the 12-day war. But the stances remained that Iran wanted to keep its ability to enrich uranium, something that the United States said was completely off the table. Do you think this is still negotiable? And of course, we have to look at the other factors here, the sponsorship of proxies across the Middle East. Of course, the likes of, you mentioned, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and of course, it's ballistic missiles. Which of these sticking points do you think is the most negotiable, and which one do you think is completely off the table for Iran in these talks?
Well, Thomas, if we go back a little point in time, in 2015, there was the agreement signed, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action between the P5+1 Germany, but the Americans of, I would say most specifically President Trump, pulled out of it in 2018. And because as per President Trump, the Iranians are not actually complying with the safeguards and also the terms of reference of the talks. Now the talks are again back on the table, and rightly you mentioned that in June last year, joint operations were carried out by Israel, that was the Rising Lion, and by America, that was the Midnight Hammer. And they did engage the Iranian nuclear installations, because at the time it was felt that possibly Iran is very close to fabricating a nuclear bomb. But the point today is the nuclear issue is, of course, one of the highly sticking point, and in that, America wants Iran to surrender all the enriched uranium so that they don't have any capability to further enrich the uranium and also take forward the nuclear program. And secondly, of course, is the missiles, because the ballistic missiles that Iran has today, they have a range of almost 3,000 kilometers, and that can hit a number of bases of America in the Middle East. And alongside are the proxies. Proxies are actually the, what I can say, they complement the Iranian defense effort, and they need also to be reined in because they are a major concern. And lastly, new dimension have been added, that is the protests that took place and the American desire, at least if not overtly, but inwardly, to change the current regime. So therefore, I think Iranians are actually in the corner. If they don't comply, then they face the threat of a direct engagement by America. That's why America has, gathered all the forces to ensure that Iranians are brought on the table on their terms under a shadow of deterrence. Thomas.
Major General Gigi Davidi, thank you so much, as always, for taking the time and joining us. It's always a great pleasure to speak to you on these issues. We turn over to East Asia next, and Taiwan has welcomed US President Donald Trump's call with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, saying it will help stabilize the region as China increases military pressure on the island. Taiwanese Deputy Foreign Minister Cheng Ming-chi made the remarks hours after Chinese state media reported that Xi had called for mutual respect in strengthening relations with Washington, while also issuing a warning about selling weapons to Taiwan. Let's in fact listen in to what the Deputy Foreign Minister has said.
I think that the only concern that going to impact the future arms sale is about our opposition party's attitude toward the arms sale, toward the defense budget. I think that's the most important, since that the U.S. has already promised to sell us, to Taiwan, a certain amount of weapons. This is very important for us to acquire those capabilities. But the problem is that so far we haven't seen any cooperation from the legislative end yet.
Qualcomm and ARM are facing mounting pressure as a global memory shortage disrupts the production of advanced chips, adding to challenges already caused by weak smartphone demand. Sales of smartphone processors have fallen short of expectations as consumers delay handset upgrades amid economic uncertainty. The shortage of critical memory components has further slowed the rollout of AI-enabled smartphones, affecting supply chains across the semiconductor industry. While demand for artificial intelligence remains strong in data centers and cloud computing, the slowdown in the mobile segment has hit chip makers heavily exposed to smartphones. Industry analysts say a recovery will depend on improved memory supplies and a rebound in consumer demand later this year. Well, that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover.